Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Lynn and I am about to embark on another crafty journey, this time into UV resin. So I was a little bit hesitant to get into resin because I only really knew about AB, like the two-part epoxy resin. And I definitely didn't want to straight away get into that because it seems very intimidating to me, just having to mix the resins and having to deal with the, chemical sort of toxic smells and things like that. So I can't avoid all of that because this is still a resin product, but UV resin, while more expensive, does seem like it might be easier to work with. So I am going to start off by saying that I am not an expert, hence starting my journey. And the purpose of this video is really just to share with you what I know, what I've learned so far through research. So I've watched other YouTube resin artists. I've read a lot of articles, blogs, and whatnot from folks. I've joined some Facebook groups just to read up on recommendations and things to be mindful of. And so I want to create this video in case anyone out there is also curious about resin, and I just want to share what I know. And I will also caveat by this video by saying that any products that I'm showing, in particular these two, and anything else that's resin related, I can't necessarily recommend them because I haven't been using them for long enough. I've literally only used this maybe 3 times, and I'll show you what I've done so far, but I can't compare it to anything else. I can't speak to the quality of it, but I will speak to why I chose these particular products and what I think of them so far. So starting off, what is resin? So resin is a polymer, and UV resin, just like epoxy resin, generally is clear, nice and hard, very should be very stable and heat resistant. I've read that it's not quite as durable, long lasting as epoxy resin, but for certain projects, maybe that's sufficient and that's okay. There are some very, very notable differences between UV resin and two-part epoxy resin. So two-part resin, as the name would suggest, is actually two different liquids that get mixed together. And one of the liquids is the resin itself. The other liquid is a hardener. And when you combine those two, a thermal chemical reaction takes place. Thermal being heat, and so that heat is actually what starts to cure and harden the resin. And so that's actually, in terms of the chemistry of everything, how the epoxy resin actually cures, how it hardens and dries. That's through just the chemical reaction between mixing the two liquids. UV resin is different in that there's only the one liquid, already making it simpler to use, because with the two-part resin, depending on the resin that you buy, there are different ratios that you need to mix those two. So that's something to be mindful of. With UV resin, you don't have to worry about that. There's only the one liquid. UV resin cures, it's photosensitive, and it cures when and if UV light hits it. So when UV light hits it, there's a photo or a light sort of reaction to the light, and that's what cures the resin or makes it hard and stabilizes it. So straight off, there's the two of them chemically are different. They cure differently. With UV or with AB two-part epoxy resin, the curing process can take 24 hours, maybe sometimes longer, to completely cure. That is to kind of get as hard and solid and dry as it ever will. So that's a pretty long process. By contrast, UV resin can take minutes. So for example, this one, right at the top here, it talks about the curing time. So if you're curing under a UV lamp, it takes 2 to 4 minutes. Under sunlight on a sunny day, 5 to 10 minutes. And under sunlight on a cloudy day, 20 to 40 minutes. So your options for curing are, if you don't want to get a UV lamp, you can just put it out in the sun. And it might take a little bit longer, but it's still a matter of minutes, under an hour, to fully cure. And then you're all set. However, if you don't have a lot of sun where you're at, or you're like me and you do a lot of crafting at night, having the lamp is really useful, and it cures even faster. Epoxy resin, you don't need anything special, you just need time. It just needs to be set out, preferably covered so that dust doesn't, kind of attach to the surface. But it just takes time. You don't need anything else special to cure it. So that right there really makes this product, for some people, worth the extra expense, because it does cost a little bit extra, and it's because it's so fast. Especially, I don't make anything to sell, but I can imagine for folks who have who sell at craft fairs, who sell on Etsy, their time to create their products, I'm sure, speeds up greatly with something like UV resin. And as well, because it does cure so quickly, maybe you can make items customized to order. If you're at a fair, for example, and somebody wants a custom keychain, you could make it for them in a matter of minutes. And so I think there's a lot of things that definitely, properties of UV resin that definitely make it worthwhile in terms of the extra expense as compared to regular 2-part epoxy resin. The things to keep in mind with resin is that you might have noticed, I didn't read it, but you might have noticed that in parentheses after UV lamp it says 36 watts. That's referring to if you use a lamp like this, the description of the product should tell you what the wattage is of the lights. Just like a light bulb has, a certain number of watts, so too do these lights. And often, I won't say, all of them, but when I made up my mind to get started and I was shopping for product, I was really attracted to kits, all-in-one kits that had like a little bit of everything to get you started, including the lamp, including resin, and some additional tools. But the thing with that is that one of the things that I learned in my research was that resins often, more often than not, actually have a particular wattage that they recommend for curing their resin, and all resins might be a little bit different from one another. And so you need to pay attention to that to make sure that your lamp has sufficient wattage to actually properly cure that resin. And so when I was looking at the all inclusive kits that do come with lamps, when I read the specification on the lamps, a lot of them were on the order of a 9-watt lamp. And some of them were 6, some were 12, so just in that neighborhood, but certainly not enough for the 36 watts that a lot of the resins, I won't say all of them, but a lot of the resins that I looked at did state 36 watts. And so right out of the gates, once I had those bits of information, I decided I was going to buy a lamp separate from outside of a kit so that I can get the wattage that I want and this one happens to be 72 watts. So it's more than sufficient for the specific resin that I have, but I think that's going to give me a broader spectrum of resins that I can work with. Being stronger than what I need, there's the risk of sort of over curing, and what I've read is that with some, probably not all, but with some resins, if you over cure it, it can shrink, it can yellow. Those are things that can happen with a UV resin that you generally don't get with a 2-part epoxy resin. So that's just something to keep in mind, but then that would just mean that if I'm using a stronger lamp, maybe I cut back on the time that I'm curing it and just incrementally work up until my piece feels sufficiently cured. So this is 72 watt, and the other thing I really wanted was a power adapter. So I wanted this to actually plug into the wall so that I get nice, consistent, sufficient power to this device. A lot of the smaller 9-watt lamps, they are powered through a USB cord, which I don't think can carry as much power as a standard power adapter, and it may not be as consistently powered as well, especially if it's coming from your laptop and you're using your laptop at the same time, for example. So those were the things that I was looking for in choosing my lamp. And I will leave links to everything in the description box below if you are curious to check any of these out. However, I just want to caveat that by saying again that I'm not endorsing or recommending any of these just yet. I just haven't had enough experience with them. I just want to let you know how I came to my buying decision. And by the way, this is a nail art lamp. So if you do like UV nail polish, generally, you would polish and then put your hand under here. This happens to be motion sensitive. So when you put your hand under, it actually turns on. So I didn't really see that as a feature that was important to me, but it's kind of a nice to have. So that is the lamp that I have, and essentially, depending on your application and what you are using your resin for, this could be like your minimal setup. A lamp, something to cure, but if you have sunlight where you're at, maybe you don't even need the lamp. And then the resin. Now, other things that came with this includes this, which is a silicone mold. And so, I don't know, it's just for fun little faceted gems of different shapes. These are pretty small, but in practicality, I don't know what I would use it for. But I think they're cute, and it was fun to practice on that because they are small, so it wasn't using up a lot of resin. Just to get my, dip my toes in the water a little bit. These I think will come in very handy. So these are just silicone mixing bowls. They're kind of small, but they're nice, and I like that they kind of come to a point here, so you can kind of pinch and pour if you're pouring directly from here. So you get 2 of those. I think that's really handy. And then you also get 2 of these. So these are silicone stir sticks / spoons. So on the one end, there's like a little bit of a spoon. If you're mixing and you just want to scoop out and pour into like these little molds here, maybe it's harder. Maybe it's too easy to kind of over pour if you're pouring directly from this and you'd prefer to just spoon it out. On the other end, there's like a flat, more of a flat little spatula, which is nice for if you are doing any doming or anything like that to kind of push your resin to the edges. So all of this came in this box along with 2 bottles of 100 gram resin. And I do kind of like that it's in 2 bottles, that way I don't have to open the second one until I'm ready, but that's what it looks like. And I don't, to be honest, know what brand this is even. I just know that so far I actually really like this, and to be honest, it was actually one of the less expensive resins. I wanted to I didn't want to out of the gates get the most expensive thing out there, but I was looking for something that wasn't a full kit that included the lamp, but did come with some extra little supplies. And especially, I was looking for something that did come with a mold so that I can try casting and see what that's like. So, so that's what I got. This all came together with the actual amount of resin was 200 grams, and then I got the lamp. Then I also got, because resins do vary, so I did, and this was more because it was on sale. So I did pick up a bottle of resin that is, it was on sale. I think it was buy one get one free. And I'm trying to see if it's near me at the moment. I don't think that it is. So, I do have these though, because it did come with a set of tools. Oh, here it is. One sec. Okay, so I wanted to try this. It's Roxy Epoxy. They do make a two-part resin, but this is definitely something that I wanted to try out because it's at a slightly higher price point than this, but being, buy one get one free, this is the 8 ounce, and they did have, I think, a 32 ounce that when you work it out per gram or per milliliter was a fantastic price. I mean, that put it at the buy one get one free at the 32 ounce volume, basically puts it similarly priced to an epoxy resin. But I didn't want to go all in just yet, so because that's a lot of resin. But you can see here, it's listing out a lot of the things that you want to look for in a good UV resin. So you want it to be crystal clear. After it's been cured, you want it to be UV resistant, so you don't want it to continue yellowing. Weather resistant, so basically kind of a little waterproof essentially. Clear, smooth, bright, no yellowing. So those are a lot of the buzzwords of properties that you're looking for. And so this definitely has a lot more details in terms of and I like that they're transparent, right? So they talk about the viscosity of the resin, curing shrinkage. So I really like that they're upfront about what amount of shrinkage to expect, because that is something that some people need to know upfront, just depending on the things that they are creating. And so that's this one, and it came with these tools, which I think are super cool. They're going to be very useful. So these are silicone. They're nice and have a nice handle, so they're a little bit easier, I think, to kind of work with than that, because they're solid handles, and then they have a nice thick silicone brush tip, and the brushes are all different sizes, different shapes. These smaller ones are going to be great for doming and just pushing that silicone right to the edge. This one I might have to glue back together. But there's that, so I did get a second type of resin to try out. And then besides that, there's one of the things that before I committed to getting into UV resin, I wanted to just make sure that there were sort of enough things that that I wanted to do with it, enough types of projects that I wanted to do with it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the other thing that I was thinking of was, well, I don't want to just keep on adding things, buying more things, adding things to my craft room. If I take up this UV resin hobby, will it help me use up some of the things I already have? And the answer to that is yes, because often, most of the time, your resins are going to be clear. I think there are some resins that are sold that are colored already, but more often than not, you're going to find it in clear. And then that gives you the flexibility to color it however you want. And there are a lot of different ways to color your resin. One is to add glitter to the resin. And then another is to use mica. So I have mica powder. This I use for when I make soap, for example, but I have smaller pots that I use in my crafting as well. You can color with your alcohol inks. So if you do any alcohol ink backgrounds, that kind of technique, or even if you have like Copic marker refills or any alcohol marker refills, you can use those inks. Just a drop or two will color your resin and keep it clear, because remember, alcohol inks are transparent, so that keeps it relatively clear, whereas these, just depending on how much you use, could make it look a little bit more opaque. So you can color your resin in a number of different ways. You can suspend a lot of different things in your resin. So for example, and really glitter, I think, is another particle that is suspended. It's just depending on the type of glitter that you're using. If it's super fine, it basically has the effect of coloring your resin if you're using a lot of it anyways. This is mica flakes, and so I thought this might be fun as something to suspend in the resin. Then you can use similarly gilding flakes, so you can suspend some of this in your resin as well. I've seen people do like gorgeous projects with gold gilding flakes in there. And you can really suspend anything. So paper, you can die cut, color something, and then suspend it in your resin project. You can put dried flowers, you can put pearls, you can put really, the sky's the limit on what you can put into your resin molds. And so I think, it's nice to add something new to my craft room that helps me use up other supplies too, especially the things that, not that any of this stuff goes bad or dries out or anything, so these all have a long shelf life. So, if it takes me a long time to work through it, it's no big problem, but it is nice to, there's something very satisfying for me to actually like finish up a product. So anything that I can add to my craft room that is yet another way of using a supply that I currently have is welcomed in my craft room. So so those are just a few of the different ways that you can additives and whatnot that you can mix with your resin to get different looks or different effects. So the other thing that the thing that I didn't mention about resin in terms of one of the differences between UV resin and two-part epoxy resin is it's something that's referred to as pot time. Pot time, if you're familiar with the glue terminology of open time, that's sort of what it equates to in my head. So pot time more specifically refers to the time period after you've mixed your two-part resin. So you've mixed your two-part resin, the time from that to when it starts to harden. That's your pot time. So essentially that's the time, that's your working time. So that's how much time you have to manipulate your resin, mix whatever you want to mix into your resin, pour it into whatever mold that you are using to cast with, or whatever your project is. You've got that, the pot time is how much time you have to work before and it's not like it's instant that it's going to harden, and crystallize instantly, but as it starts to harden, it's going to become harder to work with and harder to manipulate. And so with UV resin, it's different. Another key differentiating factor is that it basically has an infinite pot time. if it is not, this only starts to cure if and when it is exposed to UV light. So it works out really well for me, especially since a lot of times I craft at night, and so I don't even have natural sunlight coming into my room. And so as long as it's not near this lamp when the lamp is on, I have all the time in the world to do whatever it is I need to do with the resin, or apply, all the time in the world to kind of apply it just right into whatever mold or whatever item I'm trying to dome. And I don't have to feel rushed. I can really take my time and get it to look exactly how I want it to look. And so that's another thing that for me makes sense in terms of why UV resin is sold at a higher price point, because it's easier to work with on a lot of fronts, and it's more convenient to work with because of its quick curing time. And so the only thing that you need to sort of be mindful of while you're working, because you can, since it has an infinite pot time, you can mix this up in larger batches, and then pour multiple things, just so long as whatever container you've mixed it in, it's not getting exposed to the UV light. If you're sort of curing multiple projects, you just want to make sure that the light isn't hitting your resin that isn't ready to be cured yet. So that's another thing that makes UV resin really easy to work with. And so speaking of working with resin, so I want to also talk a lot about safety measures that I'm taking, because a lot of the safety measures I'm taking are off camera, so you won't see them. And I do plan to, as I get more familiar with resin, UV resin, I will do tutorial videos just to show you, as I'm learning, what different, and I'll show you some of the different molds and some of the different projects that I'm thinking of. But I am taking a lot of safety precautions that some you'll see on screen, so to speak, and some you won't see. So firstly, you'll always see me use gloves. A lot of these resins, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them say it's non-toxic. But I've only used this one, and out of the bottle, it does not have a strong smell. But when it's curing, there's a very strong chemical smell. So anything that gives off fumes like that, gives off that chemical smell, I can't imagine it's good to touch it with your bare hands. So I'll always be wearing gloves. I will always be wearing a mask as well. So I'll either be wearing an N95 mask or the more heavy-duty ventilator mask that has the filters on the side. And that one I plan to use if the resin has a really strong smell. I equate how strong a chemical smell is to how toxic and harmful it may potentially be. Now that might be a false conclusion, but I'm always going to be wearing some kind of a mask, whether it's the N95 or the ventilator style. So these are some things that are a must. And then just in terms of environment, in my room, I have my window is to the left of me and my door is to the right of me, but they are sort of almost like a little bit offset, but they're almost, kind of facing each other. So whenever I do anything with resin, I'm going to be keeping both doors open, and I'm going to be keeping my window, not both doors, sorry. I'll be keeping the door open and the window open. And that way, because they're across from one another, hopefully they generate a little bit of a cross breeze. And then, so if my window's here, my door is here, I'm also placing a box fan here, and I'm kind of just propping it on top of my trash can so that it's at above tabletop height. And so my fan here is actually going to be blowing air away from my face. That way, whatever fumes are coming out of this are getting blown away from me so that I'm even less likely to breathe it in, even behind a mask. And then it's blowing it towards the window and the door. So hopefully whatever airflow, whether it's going out the window or into the hallway, it's getting dissipated into a more open space. Hopefully it's going outside, but those are some safety precautions that I want to be sure to take, because I did read and in my research find that some people who've worked a long time with epoxy resin, a lot of places just spoke about resin in general, so I don't know if all of this applies to UV resin or if it's just epoxy resin, but they mentioned having respiratory issues, breathing in the fumes. They mentioned developing skin rashes and sensitivities to resin. So I just want to make sure that I'm taking all the safety precautions. This is one of the things that had me really reticent to get into UV resin, because I know that it does come with taking extra precautions to make sure that you're keeping yourself healthy and safe. And it's not a reason not to get into it. It's just a reason that made me hesitant. And so if you take the appropriate precautions, then I'm sure, it's safe to work with. There are resin artists out there, after all, who do this for a living. So that's sort of my setup of how I'm keeping myself safe. And then let me talk a little bit more about my setup more specifically, and some of the things that I have made so far. Nothing impressive. So here's these silicone little bowls are, I use this in my paint pouring, my acrylic paint pouring now, so I'll probably use this for resin as well. And these are super cute, and the reason why silicone is so important is because when the resin dries, it releases from here easily. So after you've mixed whatever residue, whatever resin is still left in your bowl, you can just cure your bowl and then peel that little bit of resin off. Okay, so the very first thing that I did was taking the little mold that came with my resin. I actually cured just resin by itself in one of those little faceted gem casts, and that's what came out. And for a relatively inexpensive resin, this dried, it's very dry, it's not tacky, and it's not yellow at all. And that's one of the things that I was really worried about with getting a less expensive resin, is the potential for it to yellow. But this is it's crystal clear. It's really nice, actually. And if you look at it this way, you can see how clear that is, and that it's not yellowed. And then I mixed the same resin with mica powder, and that gives you this nice pearlescent little faceted heart. So those were my first two, my test runs, and coming straight out of the lamp and after letting it rest a little bit, there's a little bit of tackiness, but I'll talk a little bit about how to address that in a bit. Then the next thing that I made, and this was one of the reasons why I wanted to go down the resin path, is a fellow design team member on one of my design teams. She made some really adorable charms for her mini album. I'll link to that video in the upper right hand corner if you're curious to check it out. But it's super cute, and and it's from shrink plastic, and I wanted to get into playing with shrink plastic because it just looks like a lot of fun. So I just bought myself like a little starter kit of shrink plastic, and it had some hardware to turn your these little charms into things like earrings or pins or whatever, keychains, things like that. But I thought this was super cute, and a lot of other folks who do shrink plastic that that they then sell like keychains or charms, they do what's called doming. So they will pour a layer of resin on the top of their shrink plastic item after it shrank down. So this was a lot larger, and this is now like it's down to 20% or less of its original size, but it has that glossy, shiny finish because I domed it with UV resin. So if I flip to the back, that's what it looks like. It's got a really dull kind of plastic look. And I think what I'll do is mix up some more resin, maybe with some glitter, maybe some white glitter, and maybe a little bit of a white mica too, to make it a little bit more solid white. And I might actually finish, give a coat, dome it from the back as well. And that way, because this looks a lot, the color looks a lot more prominent against something that's white. And I think having that glitter on the back, I don't know how much of the glitter you'll see. I wish I'd thought of the glitter, because then I would have put a little bit of glitter on the front as well. But it's all an experiment, so it'll be interesting to see how much of that comes through if I mix in some glitter with mica for the back, and that finishes off the back so that it looks nice from the back, and it has a more white kind of background for that color to pop through. Because otherwise, here's what it looks like in hand, since it is translucent. So that was one of the things that I knew I wanted to use my resin for. The other thing was when I filmed my acrylic paint pouring for my gold and black coasters, I also talked about how I finished my first set of coasters using a spray sealant that says it's gloss but doesn't really give you like a high gloss finish to it. It gives you this really nice sort of like an almost sort of pearlescent sheen, but it's somewhere between matte and gloss. I think so. I used to work in a photo mat when I was in college, and I think they called it the crystal finish, which was something in between a matte and a glossy. But as I was saying that, I thought, boy, I would really love to see how these coasters look with a nice glossy finish. And one way to achieve that is through resin. And so this is how I finished my second set of coasters with this is just one coat of UV resin. And I just applied a nice layer, not too thick, but enough to kind of cover all of this. And with a gloved hand, I kind of dabbed a finger in and just swiped, the sides, just to make sure the sides had that nice finish as well. And then I wanted this to have that nice domed effect as well. So basically just kind of used an implement. I didn't have these at the time, but I just used one of my silicone brushes to kind of push it right just to the edge. And some resins, another differentiating factor, and this one speaks to it. I don't know what the scale of viscosity is. I've never seen a measure for viscosity, but that basically tells you how thick the resin is. And that's why I lend a lot of, I'm assuming this is higher quality, not just because it's sold at a higher price point, but because they are very transparent about the particulars of this resin, including things like the viscosity, how hard does it get, and things like that. So I appreciate that, but not all resins have all of those things, but they are still characteristics of your resin that you if you kind of experiment with them, you might find some that are easier to work with than others. So for example, something that is high viscosity and is thick is going to be good for doming because it's thick. It's going to be harder to kind of push it over the edge and have it drip off because it's going to have a lot of that surface tension that kind of keeps that curved shape. Just like if you dropped a droplet of water you'll see it dome. You'll see it have it has so much surface tension on it that it kind of maintains that bubble. And the resin or any liquid will have some degree of that surface tension, and a higher viscosity resin will be thicker, will have more surface tension, and will be easier to kind of manipulate and push to the edge before you break that tension and it accidentally kind of rolls off the edge. And so so I think, this is it's I like both. It's just a matter of preference, whether you like the super high gloss or you prefer not having such high gloss. So that was another use that kind of tipped the scale for getting into UV resin. And so I think I'll be finishing, I actually prefer this, so I think I'll be finishing the rest of the coasters that I end up making. And I am giving these away as gifts for at the holidays. And so so I think this just gives it that extra bit of, professional finish to them. And the other thing is that just in terms of something that I've made for myself, in terms of process, is I made this little this little box. It's basically, it's just an Amazon Prime shipping box. I've lined it with aluminum foil, and this is basically kind of my curing chamber. So essentially, what I do, let's say I'm curing this coaster, so I'll be working on a silicone mat, and then I'll apply my resin. Again, having that infinite pot time, the infinite open time, gives me all the time in the world to get this nice, evenly coated, really take my time to push that resin to the edge without it tipping over and spilling, getting the resin on all four sides. And when it looks, and what I actually do is, I use something else, but I actually, kind of elevate this a little bit too. That way, I can kind of work with it raised off the table. And so once it's ready to be cured, then I set my lamp on top of it. You can see these two ends are covered by the lamp, these two ends are open, and then I put my little curing box over top. And the benefit of this is that I don't want to be looking at the UV light. I don't want the UV light to spill out. So that way, if I've mixed up more of this, I can actually be working on the next project, and not have to worry about whatever UV light is currently on, starting to cure resin that I've already poured out or mixed with glitter or what have you. So having the curing box is really nice so that I can block the UV. I'm not tempted to kind of stare into it, and I don't know if UV exposure, which UV rays this is, but generally UV, I think it's A is the type that's harmful to your skin and whatnot. So I doubt that this is the case with that, because these are nail lamps and you're meant to put your hands under them. But regardless, just want to have that extra bit of safety. But there's a practical, besides safety and the practicality of this, the UV not hitting an open sort of container of UV resin. The other matter of practicality of using such a box is that on these open sides, because the aluminum, this is lined with aluminum so that it's reflective. So when the UV light hits the aluminum, it's going to bounce right back. And that way, if my project is like this, especially in the case of coasters, because the lamp does have lights sort of towards the sides, but on these open edges, there's no light hitting it, except for if you cover it with a box, and that light, whatever light's coming out, gets bounced and reflected right back. So that's going to help cure the two sides as well. And what I do is I'll cure it, I'll cure it in this one direction the first time, and then I'll set it for another span of time in this direction. My particular lamp has 3 buttons for 60, 80, and 99 seconds. 99 is the max because that's only a 2-digit display. But it counts up, so you can do anything in between. You can hit 60 seconds, and if you wanted to watch it, you can watch the timer count up to 30 seconds if you just needed it for 30 seconds. So I do use this box to kind of cure, to cover my lamp as it's curing, and then I don't know how much of this I want to keep on screen when I do my tutorial videos. So a lot of this video, I want to cover some things that you may not see every time I work with or shoot a video where I'm creating some projects, because what I might do is if I have a project, I'll be working on the project and I might, have my lamp off to the side. And I might, because the box itself is not all that pleasant to look at, I might actually have this off camera to cure as I work on the next thing. So you may not always see the actual curing, the actual lamp or the box on camera. So that's a little bit about the process that I'm using anyways, and my setup for curing. So I talked about the doming things like my shrink plastic. I talked about sealing and doing that final coat on my coasters. I did. And here's the other thing that was nice about UV having such a quick curing time. I did one coaster just to start. I cured it, and then I did my hot water mug test to make sure that my mug doesn't, the hot mug doesn't create an indentation or a ring, meaning it actually has melted. And that's not the case. Like the resin, just like an epoxy resin, it dries rock hard, and so it doesn't, and it's heat resistant. So a hot mug placed on top of this doesn't do any damage to it. So I did, I plan to use it for this. I also plan to, I picked this mold up, which I just couldn't resist as I was shopping. This came up. It's letters, it's the full alphabet. So if you know me from my paper crafting videos, you know I'm a sucker for alphabet dies. So when I saw this, I guess my love of the alphabet extends to resin as well. But I thought these were cool because they are all the letters of the alphabet, all the numbers, and some hardware to create keychains. And so I thought these would make really fun gifts for everybody, kids and adults in my family and my friends. And so I thought this would be a fun project to work on. So casting some keychains. I did also buy some silicone coaster molds as well. So this is a ceramic coaster that I did some paint pouring onto. The set of coasters I bought came with this kind of cork background or pad that you can line the bottom so it doesn't scratch. But there are silicone coaster molds that you can pour resin coasters, so it'll be resin the entire thickness. And I thought I saw some really, really fun videos of people making resin coasters that look like a lot of fun to do. So especially since I think I mentioned earlier that you can suspend a lot of different things. So on a coaster, which is slightly larger, you could even suspend photos. So imagine putting somebody's photo on here so you never have to know whose drink it is. You could just lift up the mug and look at their face, and then you'll know whose drink that is. So I thought that would be really cute and just like a fun little, sort of like a novelty gift. But I thought it would be fun to kind of experiment with that. Now, I don't know with the coasters if I think I'll move on over to epoxy resin, because that will require a greater volume of resin, and considering the fact that UV resin is more expensive than epoxy resin, I'm not sure when I start to get to the point where I feel comfortable enough to make a coaster, I might make the leap to using a two-part resin, but we'll see. For now, I'm going to have some fun just playing with these smaller casts and smaller scale projects just to have some fun and get a little bit more comfortable using resin, any type of resin. I brushed on a little bit the notion that some resins, when they're done curing, might have a bit of tackiness or stickiness, and if you've done any research on UV resin, you might have encountered a lot of people complaining, or if you read any product reviews, you might hear a lot of people complaining about stickiness. That can occur for a couple of reasons. So one, it might not be fully cured. Two, though, your project could be fully cured and it might still have a little bit of stickiness or tackiness. What I heard one person, and I've only heard one person explain this, and at the moment I can't remember if it's a video that I saw it in or if it's a product review or somebody on a Facebook group. But what I learned from that person was that when the UV resin is exposed to oxygen or the air, there is a little bit of a chemical reaction that happens there as well, and so it some of that surface stickiness, it just is never able to completely cure because of whatever reaction has happened with oxygen, with the air. However, that's something that can be easily remedied by just taking a cotton pad or something like a shop cloth and soaking it in a little bit of rubbing alcohol. So I have 99% alcohol, but I think you want 91 or above is something that I heard recommended multiple times. And just wipe this down. Now, one thing that I will suggest is, in terms of process, what I would recommend doing. So a lot of the resins also talk about this idea of degassing and no bubbles and things like that. Those are some key phrases that keyword phrases that a lot of people are looking for when they're looking for a good resin. And what that's referring to is, as you're mixing your resin, especially if you're adding any colorant to it, like there's other things that you can get that I don't happen to have, like pigment dyes and other colorants that you can add. So when you're mixing those things into your resin or glitter or whatever have you, there's always the potential of adding air and bubbles and trapping that air. The more viscous, the thicker your resin is, the harder that those air bubbles are to like kind of burst or pop. And so a lot of resins will advertise as self-degassing, meaning if you just let it alone, those air bubbles will rise to the surface and then pop and break. And then all resins should be self-leveling. So you want to work on a nice level surface and give it some time to just settle after you've applied it. Don't be super eager to put your lamp over it right away. I was, and some of my first ones had like little micro bubbles. Not too bad, but something to keep in mind. In the future ones like these, what I did was, after I applied it, I kind of let it sit. You can torch it to pop those air bubbles, but what a lot of people have said is, with silicone mats, you don't want to torch it because you could actually damage your mat. So you should just let your resin relax a little bit, give it that time to degas for those air bubbles to rise to the surface. If you need to pop them, some people have spritz with alcohol For something like this, I did torch it because I'm not working on a mold. So I torched it. But if you just leave it and your resin has a, degassing kind of property, those air bubbles will come to the surface and hopefully pop on their own. And then you can cure it. And so same with before you're curing it. It's nice after you finish curing to just let it settle, let it set a little bit. And then touch it to see if it's still a little bit sticky. And if it is still a little bit sticky, which some of these were, some weren't, this was, because it's a sort of larger surface area, I just wiped it down with alcohol, an alcohol kind of soaked towel, and paper towel, and gave it a really good wipe, and then I just washed it with soap and water. And that was it. And it's not tacky at all anymore. So, those are sort of the things that don't rush to judgment on your resin. If straight out of the lamp, it seems a little bit tacky. And one of the things I appreciate with this, even being somewhat, inexpensive, this actually spoke to that. This actually says that if you find that it is sticky, to do exactly that. Now, I had already found that bit of information on the internet. There are a lot of people who address the stickiness and that alcohol, just wiping it with some alcohol does the trick. And so I was really happy to see that on this box because, again, I always appreciate when companies, brands are transparent about their product, and for me it just shows that they're not trying to hide anything or get away with anything. So that's something to bear in mind if you are getting into resin. Some of the things that some of the properties or characteristics that a lot of people are on the lookout for is that tackiness. Now sometimes I'm guessing with some brands of resin, maybe you can't completely remove that tackiness, and that's why it's an issue. But then again, people who are leaving those reviews, I don't know if they know that trick with the alcohol. So that's something to kind of take with a grain of salt if you're reading reviews on different products. And then there's the yellowing factor, whether after curing the resin dries like crystal clear. Clear being, is it cloudy or completely translucent? And then also the yellow factor, if it's completely clear versus has a yellow tinge to it. And so far, I've been really happy with this. Like I said, even being a little bit inexpensive and having no brand that I can see. In fact, I kind of looked for this by itself without all the extra stuff, and I haven't found it. But I didn't look too terribly hard. But this is one that I think I would definitely buy again. But I definitely, like I said, want to try out some different ones just to see how they compare and get a better sense for what is a good resin and what's or at least good for me. The viscosity matters, so a thinner resin might be good if you do plan to add a lot of stuff to it. So for example, if you plan to add a lot of glitter, some people put sand and have created some really fun beachy kind of themed coasters and even these letter keychains. And some people have suspended little pearls, like beads, little seed beads, lots of stuff. Oh, seed beads. Yeah, I have a lot of that I can put into here too. Things like your sequins and confetti and all of that jazz. You can suspend all of that in your resin mix. It might be a little bit easier to mix those into a resin that is a little bit thinner, and that lower viscosity will also help with the degassing and with air bubbles rising to the surface, especially if it's lending itself to being something that can take a lot of mixtures like glitter, mica, sequins, all of that, and you're doing a lot of stirring. You might be introducing a lot of air bubbles, but being that it's a thinner consistency, it's easier for those air bubbles to rise through that resin to the surface and then pop. So you might prefer a resin that has is a little bit thinner versus a resin that is a little bit thicker. If you're doing casting, for example, but if you're doing like doming like this, or sealing something like your coasters, you might want something a little bit thicker so that you can just, especially with this, I thought it was a nice consistency because I could just do the one coat. Not that it takes too terribly long to cure, just a matter of 5 minutes or so, but then I don't have to use as much resin. So that was the other upside to having something that is a little bit thicker consistency. I can just do the one coat. I get that nice domed, curved edge on the sides, and then it's a little bit easier to work with in that application. So just a couple of different properties, characteristics of resin that I've learned about so far. And I think that's about all I know. So I basically did a little bit of a brain dump of everything that I know, what my approach has been so far, the few times that I've used the resin and the lamp. And I think my next project is going to be some keychains. So stay tuned for that, and I will link to that video when I have it ready at the end of this one. But really the best way to catch new videos as I post them is to subscribe to my channel and ring the notification bell. So I hope that if you're new to resin, have been thinking about it, that this brain dump of what I've learned so far has been useful to you. I know this is a rather long video, so if you're still watching, thanks so much, because I really appreciate it. And give me whatever feedback you have, whether it's suggestion, tips if you are a resin artist, have used it before, would love recommendations, especially on different brands of resin to try. And if I got anything wrong, definitely leave it in the comments as well, so that we can all learn together. And if you have any questions that you want me to explore, if it's within my ability, I will definitely try to explore that and address it in future videos. Thank you again, and until next time, happy crafting and have a fantastic day. Bye.